The HOA president's husband thought my tractor was already his. I watched a man climb into my $68,000 John Deere before sunrise, smile at my farmhouse, and drive it toward the gate like he'd owned it his whole life. He believed an HOA vote gave him more authority than my deed. I didn't chase him. I didn't yell. I quietly reached for something inside my jacket, because this wasn't about a tractor anymore. It was about the moment confidence collided with the law. If you've ever wondered what happens when an HOA pushes one step too far, stay with me. The ending isn't what anyone on that ranch expected. And if stories about standing your ground with patience, proof, and common sense are your kind of stories, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and join me for the next one. I was standing at my kitchen window before sunrise with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold when I saw the impossible happen. Mark Holloway climbed into my John Deere. Not an old tractor. Not a worn-out backup machine that barely saw daylight. He was sitting in my nearly new $68,000 John Deere 6155M, the one I'd bought after saving for years and putting off every unnecessary expense on the ranch. It was the machine that kept 2,400 acres moving through calving season, hay harvest, and fall feeding. Without it, work didn't slow down. It stopped. Mark pulled the cab door shut like he'd done it 100 times. He adjusted the seat, looked straight toward my farmhouse, then smiled. It wasn't the nervous smile of a man borrowing equipment. It wasn't even the grin of someone trying to get away with something. It was the smile of the man who honestly believed the tractor already belonged to him. A second later, the diesel engine rumbled to life. The sound carried across the equipment yard, bouncing off the steel barn and rolling over the cattle pens where several cows lifted their heads for a moment before going back to feeding. I didn't move. I watched him ease the tractor away from the parking pad, point the nose toward my front gate, and begin driving across my own ranch, as though he had every legal right in the world. Most people would have run outside. Most people would have started yelling. Some probably would have jumped into their pickup and blocked the gate. I did none of those things. Instead, I quietly set my coffee mug beside the kitchen sink and walked down the hallway toward the mudroom. My work jacket still hung on the same hook where I'd left it the night before. I slipped it on, reached into the inside pocket, and pulled out something Mark Holloway had absolutely no idea existed. For just a second, I held it in my hand before clipping it beneath the edge of my jacket, where it remained mostly hidden. Then I looked back through the window. Mark was still smiling. He thought he'd already won. He couldn't have been more wrong, because what he believed was an argument over HOA rules had already crossed into something entirely different. He just didn't know it yet. The strange part wasn't that someone was stealing my tractor. The strange part was that I'd spent the last several days quietly preparing for the exact moment I was now watching unfold. Nothing about this morning surprised me. Not the flatbed trailer parked outside my equipment gate. Not the second pickup idling behind it. Not the unfamiliar man standing beside the trailer checking his watch while Mark drove my tractor closer. I'd expected every bit of it. The only thing I hadn't known was exactly what time they'd arrive. That certainty hadn't come from instinct. It came from paperwork, from conversations, from threats that had slowly grown bolder over the previous several months, until someone finally convinced himself that an HOA board had more authority than a recorded property deed. That someone was Rebecca Holloway, president of Silver Creek Preserve HOA, and Mark's wife. People often assume fights like this begin with shouting matches over fences or angry neighbors calling the sheriff. They're usually wrong. Real trouble almost always starts much quieter than that. It starts with someone deciding the law should work differently for them than it does for everyone else. Rebecca had spent months trying to convince county officials that my ranch was hurting her subdivision. When that failed, she decided she'd solve the problem herself. Mark had volunteered to help. As I watched the tractor roll closer to the ranch gate, I realized he was following her plan almost perfectly. Almost. There was one detail neither of them had bothered to learn before stepping onto my property. And within the next few minutes, that single mistake was going to change both of their lives. But to understand why I stood there watching instead of chasing my own tractor, you need to know how a 70-year-old Montana cattle ranch became the target of a homeowners association that believed expensive houses mattered more than the people who had worked this land for generations. That story started months before Mark ever put his hands on my tractor, and by the time he turned that ignition key, the outcome had already been set in motion. My family had been running cattle on those 2,400 acres since my grandfather filed the original deed in 1954. Every fence line, every stock pond, every gravel lane had been surveyed, recorded, and maintained long before anyone imagined building luxury homes against the eastern boundary of the ranch. Silver Creek Preserve arrived 8 years ago. Developers carved 60 acres out of an old hay parcel bordering my property and marketed it as Montana Ranch Living with Modern Luxury. Their brochures featured mountain views, open pasture, and grazing cattle in the distance, as though working ranches were decorative scenery instead of functioning businesses. People bought the dream. Rebecca Holloway bought the authority. Within her first year as HOA president, she'd convinced herself that preserving property values meant controlling everything homeowners could see beyond their subdivision fences. Apparently, that included my ranch. The first letter arrived on expensive stationery. Rebecca politely suggested relocating my equipment yard because tractors and hay trailers were inconsistent with the visual expectations of an upscale residential community. I read it once, smiled to myself, and mailed back a copy of the recorded plat showing my property boundaries, along with a courteous explanation that my ranch was neither governed by nor subject to Silver Creek Preserve's bylaws. I never received a reply. But silence didn't mean acceptance. It meant she was looking for another angle. That angle appeared 3 months later at a county planning commission meeting. Harold Jensen called me the same evening. "You might want to sit down before I tell you this," he said. I laughed. "That's serious?" Worse. Rebecca Holloway spent 20 minutes asking us to create a buffer ordinance restricting agricultural equipment within sight of residential developments. I leaned back in my chair. "How'd that go?" Harold chuckled. "About as well as you'd expect." We reminded her Montana law protects existing agricultural operations. Your ranch predates that subdivision by over 60 years. "So that's the end of it?" "No," Harold answered after a long pause. "That's the beginning." He was right. Rebecca didn't lose gracefully. She simply changed tactics. The complaints started arriving one after another: noise, dust, livestock odors, early morning equipment. Every report described normal ranch work as though it were some kind of environmental disaster. The county investigated each complaint. Each investigation ended exactly the same way: agricultural exemption, no violation, case closed. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stopped by one afternoon after the third complaint. He climbed out of his pickup, looked across the pasture where my cattle were grazing, and shook his head before I could even ask why he was there. "I'm starting to recognize your address without looking at the paperwork." I wish I could say the same. He handed me copies of the latest complaint. "Rebecca claims your hay baler creates excessive industrial noise before 8 in the morning." I couldn't help smiling. "Daniel, cattle don't exactly wait until office hours," he laughed. "I know. That's why I'm closing this one before I even leave the driveway." As he turned to leave, his expression grew serious. Just keep documenting everything." "I already am." "Good." He nodded toward the subdivision beyond my eastern fence. "Because people who keep losing through official channels sometimes decide to stop using official channels." Those words stayed with me. Over the following weeks, unfamiliar SUVs began slowing near my equipment yard. Ben Carter noticed them before I did. "They're taking pictures," he said one morning while climbing down from a feed truck. "Of what?" "Everything. The tractor, the combines, the hay wagons, the barns, even the fuel tanks." We stood quietly as another black SUV paused outside the ranch entrance. A camera lens appeared briefly through the passenger window. Then the vehicle drove away. Ben looked at me. Think they're building another complaint? I watched the dust settle behind the SUV. No. For the first time since Rebecca's campaign had begun, something didn't feel administrative anymore. It felt personal, and personal disputes have a dangerous habit of becoming something much bigger. I just didn't know how much bigger Rebecca Holloway was willing to make it. The answer came in my mailbox 4 days later. It wasn't another complaint from the county. It was a certified letter from an attorney representing Silver Creek Preserve HOA. The language was polished, expensive, and completely detached from reality. According to the letter, my equipment yard had become a continuing visual nuisance that was causing measurable financial harm to neighboring homeowners. It demanded that I relocate all heavy machinery, including my John Deere tractor, behind newly constructed screening or move the equipment to another section of my ranch, where it could not be seen from the subdivision. I read the final paragraph twice. Failure to comply, it warned, could result in civil litigation seeking injunctive relief and monetary damages. I folded the letter and drove straight into town. Rachel Bennett didn't even finish reading the second page before lowering it onto her desk. "You've got to be kidding me." I wish they were. She leaned back in her chair and tapped the document with one finger. "They're trying to apply HOA appearance standards to property they don't govern. That's like your neighbor telling you what color to paint your barn because he doesn't like looking at it." So they don't have a case? They don't have a theory. Rachel opened one of the thick Montana property law books behind her desk and flipped directly to a bookmarked section. "Your ranch predates the subdivision by decades. Agricultural operations are specifically protected under state law. Their bylaws stop at your surveyed boundary. Everything beyond that belongs to the county and the deed." She smiled. "I'm going to enjoy answering this." Her response was short, direct, and supported by statute after statute. She attached copies of my recorded deed, the county plat, zoning records, and cited previous Montana appellate decisions affirming agricultural protections. She ended with one sentence I especially appreciated. "Any lawsuit filed upon these claims would be vigorously defended, and recovery of attorney's fees would be sought for pursuing legally unsupported claims." We mailed it that afternoon. The HOA attorney never answered. For nearly 2 weeks, everything became quiet. Too quiet. Ben noticed it before I did. They stopped driving by. I looked up from repairing a gate hinge. Who? The black SUVs. He was right. The photographs stopped. The complaints stopped. Even Rebecca disappeared. Most people would have considered that a victory. I didn't. People who suddenly abandon a strategy usually haven't given up. They've replaced it. 3 mornings later, Ben walked into the shop carrying his phone. "You ought to see this." He handed me the screen. Someone had posted photographs of my ranch equipment on the Silver Creek Preserve neighborhood page. There was my tractor, my hay baler, my fuel trailer, even my cattle working pens. Every picture had been taken from outside the fence line. The captions claimed the ranch was lowering property values and creating unsafe industrial conditions beside a luxury community. The comments were worse. Some homeowners questioned why equipment that large was allowed near children. Others demanded the county force me to move everything. A few suggested the HOA should take action if county officials refused. Ben looked at me. "That sounds different." "It is. This doesn't feel like complaints anymore." "No." I zoomed in on one photograph. It wasn't the tractor that caught my attention. It was the angle. The photographer had stood in exactly one location where the equipment gate, security cameras, and trailer access could all be seen at once. Whoever took those pictures wasn't simply documenting equipment. They were studying how to reach it. That afternoon, I drove the entire perimeter of my equipment yard. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been touched. but tire tracks crossed the gravel shoulder outside my entrance. Fresh ones, too wide for a passenger car. Probably a pickup towing something heavy. I photographed everything: the tracks, the gate, the fence, the camera positions. Then I copied every image onto 2 separate hard drives before placing one inside my office safe. Ben watched me lock it. "You think somebody's actually planning something?" I looked toward the eastern fence where the rooftops of Silver Creek Preserve sat just above the rolling pasture. "I don't know yet," I paused, "but I think they're done trying to convince the county. And if that's true," I closed the safe door, "their next move won't come on attorney letterhead." It came the following Saturday. Ben called just after 8 in the morning. "You've got company." By the time I reached the equipment yard, a white 3/4-ton pickup was parked outside my entrance with a flatbed trailer attached behind it. Mark Holloway was standing beside the trailer. He wasn't alone. Rebecca stood several feet away with a leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm, speaking quietly with another man wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt embroidered with the logo of a private land-use consulting company. The consultant wasn't looking at my cattle. He wasn't studying fences. He was photographing my tractor. Every angle. The cab, the serial number plate, the front loader, the access gate, even the clearance between the equipment yard and the county road. Ben quietly held up his phone. "I've been recording since they arrived." "Good." I walked toward the fence but stopped well inside my property line. Rebecca smiled with the confidence of someone delivering good news. "Mr. Walker." "Rebecca, I believe we've finally found a solution that's acceptable for everyone." I wasn't aware there was a problem to solve. She ignored the comment and removed a document from her portfolio. Our board met Thursday evening. She held the paper up just high enough for me to see the Silver Creek Preserve HOA letterhead across the top. "The association has unanimously adopted Resolution 24. I said nothing. She seemed disappointed that I hadn't asked what it was. "Our legal committee determined that oversized industrial equipment creating continuing visual harm to homeowners may be temporarily relocated during pending zoning review proceedings." I almost laughed. "Pending zoning review?" "Correct. There isn't one." Her smile never moved. "There will be." "No," I replied. "There won't." Mark stepped forward before Rebecca could answer. "County officials are already aware of the situation." "Really?" "They understand cooperation is everyone's best interest." I looked directly at him. "Which county official told you that?" His confidence hesitated for only the fraction of a second. "The appropriate people." I nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Rebecca extended the paperwork toward me. "You should read the resolution." "I don't need to." "It authorizes temporary removal of non-compliant equipment." "It authorizes nothing." Her expression hardened. "Our attorney disagrees." "My deed disagrees." For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then the consultant quietly closed his camera case. "I've got everything I need." He climbed into his SUV and drove away without another word. Rebecca watched him leave before turning back toward me. "I'd strongly encourage you to cooperate voluntarily." "With what?" "The relocation." "My tractor?" She nodded. "Onto whose property?" She didn't answer. Mark did. "We're prepared to handle transportation." Ben couldn't help himself. "That's generous," he muttered. I raised one hand slightly, signaling him to stay quiet. Then I looked back at Mark. "You planning on loading it onto that trailer?" "If necessary." "You have a court order?" "No." "A county directive?" "No." "Written authorization from anyone outside your HOA?" Rebecca answered this time. "Our board has already voted." I looked down at the document still in her hand. "Rebecca, your board can vote that the moon belongs to the subdivision." It wouldn't make it true. The smile disappeared from her face. "We're trying to avoid unnecessary conflict." "No," I said calmly. "You're creating it." They left a few minutes later without another word. But before driving away, Mark slowed his truck beside my gate. He looked directly at my tractor, then at the trailer behind his pickup. The message couldn't have been clearer. After they disappeared down the county road, Ben lowered his phone. "You think they'll actually come back?" "I do." "You think they'll try it?" "I think they already believe they have permission." That afternoon, I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Daniel Brooks listened without interrupting as I laid Rebecca's resolution, Ben's recordings, and photographs across his desk. When he reached the final page, he removed his reading glasses. "This isn't legal authority." "I know." "They're treating it like it is." "I know." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm documenting everything today." "I was hoping you would." He typed steadily into his report before looking back up. "If they return and attempt to remove your equipment, call us immediately." "I will." He slid the completed incident report across the desk for my signature. "This establishes something important." "What's that?" "That they were warned before the crime." I signed my name. Neither of us realized just how valuable that report was about to become. Because 3 mornings later, before sunrise, my phone lit up with a message from Ben. "Someone's inside the tractor." I didn't answer. I was already pulling on my boots. A second message appeared before I reached the back door. "Mark's here. Flatbed too. Another guy with him." I looked through the kitchen window toward the equipment yard. The cab light inside my John Deere was glowing. A diesel engine turned over once, twice, then settled into its familiar idle. I'd heard that engine thousands of times. My father had taught me that every machine develops its own voice if you listen long enough. I knew every vibration that tractor made under load, every whistle from the turbo, every slight shake during a cold start. Hearing someone else operate it without permission felt strangely personal. But emotion wasn't useful anymore. Evidence was. I walked outside at the same steady pace I'd use for any ordinary morning. Ben was standing behind the maintenance shed with his phone raised. "You've got everything?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Started recording before they even opened the gate." "Keep recording." Mark had already driven the tractor several yards from its parking space. The flatbed trailer waited outside the entrance exactly where I'd expected it. The second man stood near the trailer ramps, waving Mark forward with practiced hand signals like they'd loaded equipment together many times before. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was rehearsed. Mark eased the tractor toward the gate, occasionally glancing toward the farmhouse. He expected me to come running. He wanted an argument. Instead, all he saw was me standing quietly beside the barn. His confidence grew. He rolled the tractor closer, close enough that I could hear him laughing with the other man over the engine noise. Ben lowered his voice. "Should we stop him?" "No." "He'll get away." "No, he won't." Ben looked at me with obvious confusion. "They've already crossed the line." "What line?" "The legal one." I checked my watch. 6:44 a.m. Every security camera covering the equipment yard had been recording for nearly 20 minutes. Ben's phone captured another angle. The sheriff's report documenting Mark's earlier visit had already established prior intent. Rebecca's signed HOA resolution established motive. Now all we needed was the final piece. The actual theft. Mark drove completely through my equipment gate. All 4 tires crossed the boundary where the gravel yard met the ranch access road. The second man unfolded one of the trailer ramps. "Little farther!" he shouted. Mark nodded confidently. The tractor rolled another 10 feet, then another. He had complete physical control of equipment worth $68,000 that he neither owned nor possessed lawful authority to move. Exactly what Sheriff Brooks had warned them not to do. I looked at Ben. "Time?" He checked his phone. 6:45. I nodded once. Perfect. For weeks, Rebecca had insisted this was nothing more than an HOA enforcement matter. For weeks, Mark had repeated that the county quietly supported them. For weeks, they'd hidden behind words like compliance, appearance standards, and community authority. None of those words mattered anymore. At that moment, there was no zoning dispute, no HOA disagreement, no property value discussion. There was only a documented act taking place on recorded private property. The second man walked toward the tractor, preparing to guide it onto the trailer. Then he noticed me. His expression changed immediately. He nudged Mark and pointed toward the barn. Mark looked over. He smiled. Actually smiled. Then he climbed down from the tractor with a folded document in his hand. I figured you'd finally come talk. He held up the same HOA resolution I'd seen days earlier. We're authorized to relocate this equipment pending review. I didn't even glance at the paper. You've already made your decision. Mark frowned. What does that mean? It means you're no longer standing here because of paperwork. He looked genuinely puzzled. I'm standing here because of what you've already done. He laughed. I've moved it 20 feet. Closer to 30. So what? I looked past him toward the idling tractor. You've just provided every piece of evidence this case was missing. His smile faded just slightly. For the first time all morning, uncertainty crossed his face. He still believed this was an HOA argument. He had absolutely no idea that the next few seconds were about to turn his confidence into panic. I reached beneath my work jacket and clipped my credentials where he could see them. Mark stared at the badge. The change in his face was immediate. The smugness disappeared first. Then the color drained from his cheeks as his eyes moved from the badge to the tractor, then back to me. Mark Holloway, I said, keeping my voice level. Shut the engine off and step away from the equipment. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The second man near the trailer took one look at my credentials and began backing away. Stay where you are, I told him. He stopped for half a second. Then he turned, hurried to a dark pickup parked beyond the gate, and drove away, leaving the trailer ramps down behind him. Mark watched him disappear. That man was hired transportation, he said quickly. He didn't know anything. Neither did you, apparently. Mark's eyes narrowed. You're a rancher. I am. You can't just pretend to be law enforcement because we moved your tractor. I've served as a sworn county reserve deputy for 22 years. The words landed harder than any accusation I could have made. I had worked rural theft cases, cattle fraud, stolen trailers, and equipment rings operating across county lines. I kept that part of my life separate from the ranch because I never wanted a badge settling ordinary neighbor disputes. But this was no longer ordinary. Mark had entered private property after written warning, taken control of a $68,000 machine, and moved it toward a waiting trailer. That wasn't enforcement. It was a felony in progress. I took out my phone and called Sheriff Daniel Brooks. He answered immediately. It's happening, I said. The tractor? Mark has possession. Ben recorded the entire sequence. One accomplice just fled. Do not make the arrest yourself, Daniel said. We're 7 minutes out. I wasn't planning to. Mark heard every word. His posture changed. For the first time, he looked less like Rebecca Holloway's enforcer and more like a man realizing his wife could not vote him out of criminal charges. This is ridiculous, he said. The board authorized removal. I pointed toward the folded resolution in his hand. Keep holding that. He looked down at it. Why? Because it's evidence. The tractor continued idling behind him, its exhaust pulsing into the cold air. Ben remained near the shed, phone steady, capturing Mark, the trailer, the open gate, and the document bearing Rebecca's signature. A few minutes later, 2 county cruisers entered the ranch with no sirens. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped from the first vehicle. The younger deputy beside him looked at me, then smiled with recognition. Morning, Ethan. Mark heard the name. His head snapped toward the deputy. The second officer climbed out and gave me the same familiar nod. That was when Mark finally understood. The deputies didn't recognize me as the angry farmer who had called for help. They recognized me as one of their own. Daniel walked directly to the tractor and switched off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the diesel noise had. Then he turned to Mark. "Mr. Holloway, place the resolution on the hood of my cruiser and keep your hands where I can see them." Mark obeyed. No argument, no smile. Daniel examined the paper without touching it. "Is this the document you claim authorized you to remove Mr. Walker's tractor?" Mark hesitated. "Rebecca said the county approved it." Daniel looked at him. "I am the county sheriff. We approved no such thing." That sentence ended whatever confidence Mark had left. Daniel assigned another deputy to take my statement, so my role remained clean. Ben handed over his video. The trailer, tire tracks, security footage, and tractor position were photographed before anything was moved. Mark was not taken away in handcuffs that morning. He was issued a formal notice to appear while investigators reviewed the evidence and searched for the man who had fled. Rebecca arrived just as the deputies were finishing. She stepped out of her SUV holding her phone, prepared to take control of the scene. Then she saw Daniel. She saw my badge. And she saw her signed resolution sealed inside an evidence bag. For once, Rebecca Holloway had nothing to say. But the silence around that equipment yard did not mean the fight was over. It meant the investigation had finally reached her. Sheriff Daniel Brooks asked Rebecca to remain near her SUV while another deputy finished photographing the scene. She folded her arms. "This has been completely misunderstood," she said. Mark was carrying out a board-approved compliance action. Daniel looked toward the evidence bag containing the resolution. "Then the board can explain that in writing." Rebecca's confidence returned just enough for her to make a mistake. "We already did." Daniel glanced at me. I said nothing. That afternoon, I removed myself from every law enforcement decision connected to the case. I gave a formal witness statement as the property owner, turned over my badge number for the conflict review, and let Daniel assign 2 other deputies to handle the investigation. I wanted no shortcuts, no questions about favoritism. If the case moved forward, it would move on evidence alone. There was plenty of it. Ben's recording showed Mark entering the equipment yard, starting the tractor, and driving it toward the trailer. My security cameras captured the same act from 3 separate angles. The earlier incident report proved Mark had already been warned that the HOA resolution carried no lawful authority. Then investigators requested the HOA's internal records. Rebecca resisted. She claimed board communications were private and accused the sheriff's department of interfering with community governance. Rachel Bennett answered that argument with a preservation notice ordering the HOA, Rebecca, and Mark not to delete emails, meeting minutes, text messages, or contractor communications connected to my ranch. 2 days later, the first documents arrived. The meeting minutes were carefully written, too carefully. They described the tractor as an external visual hazard and discussed temporary relocation pending legal clarification. No one used the word theft. No one admitted the county had rejected every zoning request. But one line changed the case. Under implementation, the minutes stated, President Rebecca Holloway authorized Mark Holloway to coordinate equipment removal and transportation. Mark had not acted alone. He had followed written instructions. Daniel found more in the attached email chain. Rebecca had asked the land use consultant for tractor dimensions, estimated weight, gate clearance, and the size of trailer required to move it. Mark had forwarded photographs of my equipment yard and written, "Tuesday before daylight gives us the cleanest window." Ethan usually works the north pasture first. They had studied my routine, planned the timing, arranged transportation, and discussed moving the tractor before any court, county agency, or law enforcement office approved a thing. The man who fled from the trailer was located that evening. He told investigators Mark had hired him for what Mark called an authorized equipment recovery. He produced text messages confirming the pickup time, address, and payment. Rebecca responded by sending a letter to Silver Creek homeowners claiming her husband had acted independently. Rachel placed that letter beside the meeting minutes on her desk. She just contradicted her own records. "Can the HOA be held responsible?" I asked. Rachel looked through the email chain again. "This isn't one board member losing his temper. This is planning, authorization, and use of HOA resources." She closed the folder. "Yes, Ethan. The organization may be responsible." That answer shifted the stakes overnight. Until then, most homeowners believed the problem belonged to Mark. Now their dues, their insurance coverage, and possibly their property assessments were exposed because Rebecca had turned an internal HOA vote into a plan to take private equipment. By the end of the week, prosecutors were reviewing conspiracy, attempted theft, and criminal trespass charges. The same paperwork Rebecca had created to make her authority look official was now being read line by line as evidence against her. And once the homeowners learned what those documents contained, Silver Creek Preserve stopped defending its president. It started tearing itself apart. The first sign came from someone I had never met. A woman named Linda Morrison, who lived 2 streets inside the subdivision, called Rachel Bennett's office asking whether homeowners could be personally liable if the HOA lost the case. Rachel put the call on speaker while I sat across from her desk. "My family didn't vote for any of this," Linda said. "We were told the ranch was violating county rules. Nobody said the board was planning to take somebody's equipment." Rachel answered carefully. "Individual liability depends on each person's involvement. Right now, our focus is on the actions taken by the board and those who carried them out." There was a long silence. Then Linda quietly replied, "People are furious." She wasn't exaggerating. Within days, homeowners began demanding copies of board meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence connected to the tractor incident. Rebecca tried refusing the requests, claiming attorney-client privilege, but several board members objected publicly. They had signed off on landscaping budgets and maintenance contracts, not what now appeared to be a coordinated attempt to seize private property. The emergency HOA meeting was anything but orderly. Residents questioned why association money had been used to hire a land use consultant. Others wanted to know why legal fees had been spent chasing a ranch that wasn't even inside HOA jurisdiction. One homeowner reportedly stood up and asked a question that silenced the room. "If the county told us no, why did Rebecca keep telling us we had authority?" Nobody answered. At the same time, Rachel filed our civil complaint. It named Mark Holloway individually and Silver Creek Preserve HOA as defendants. The claims included civil conspiracy, trespass, attempted conversion of personal property, and intentional interference with lawful agricultural operations. Every allegation was supported by documents already collected during the criminal investigation. No exaggeration, no speculation, just records. The complaint reached the HOA's insurance carrier before the end of the week. That changed everything. Insurance companies don't care about neighborhood politics. They care about exposure. Their investigators requested every email, invoice, board resolution, and attorney communication connected to Rebecca's campaign against my ranch. The requests went far beyond what the HOA expected. Board members who had once defended Rebecca suddenly realized investigators were reading years of internal correspondence. One after another, they hired their own attorneys. Rebecca continued insisting Mark had acted on his own. Unfortunately for her, the emails told a different story. One message instructed Mark to move quickly before Walker creates another legal obstacle. Another attached photographs of my tractor with measurements for trailer placement. A third discussed using HOA reserve funds to reimburse transportation costs after the equipment had been relocated. Every new document weakened Rebecca's position. Every denial made the contradictions more obvious. Sheriff Daniel Brooks called me late one afternoon. "The prosecutor has finished reviewing the evidence. How does it look?" "They're moving forward. Against Mark and anyone the evidence supports." He paused. I've been doing this a long time, Ethan. So have I. I don't often see people build a stronger case against themselves than Rebecca did. Neither did I. She had believed paperwork created authority. Instead, paperwork preserved intent. A week later, another letter arrived from the HOA. This one wasn't signed by Rebecca. It came from the board's vice president. The letter informed homeowners that Rebecca had temporarily stepped away from board operations while outside counsel reviewed pending legal matters. It also announced a special meeting to discuss leadership changes. Ben read the letter twice before handing it back. So they're turning on her? No, I said. They're trying to survive her. The criminal case was still moving toward court. The civil lawsuit was gathering momentum. The insurance carrier had not yet made a decision. But everyone involved understood the same thing. The next battle would not be fought in the subdivision. It would be fought in a courtroom where HOA resolutions, recorded deeds, and sworn testimony carried far more weight than confidence ever could. Judge Samuel Whitmore opened the first hearing with a sentence that set the tone for everything that followed. This court is not deciding neighborhood preferences, he said. It is deciding whether the law was respected. That was exactly where I wanted the discussion to begin. The prosecutor called Mark Holloway first. There was no dramatic argument, no raised voices. Instead, the evidence spoke one document at a time. Ben's video showed Mark driving my John Deere toward the waiting trailer. My security cameras confirmed the same sequence from multiple angles. Sheriff Daniel Brooks identified the incident report I had filed 3 days before the theft attempt, documenting Mark's earlier visit and his claim that the HOA intended to remove my equipment. Then came the HOA resolution. The prosecutor held up the original document recovered that morning. Mr. Holloway, he asked, is this the document you relied upon when you entered Mr. Walker's property? Mark looked toward his attorney before answering. Yes. And did you possess any court order? No. Any county authorization? No. Any written permission from the property owner? No. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. The prosecutor didn't need another question. The answers had already established the point. Next came the email records. Rebecca's messages appeared on the courtroom monitors one after another. Instructions to photograph my equipment. Discussions about trailer capacity. Comments about arriving before daylight. Her authorization directing Mark to coordinate the removal. Each message contradicted her public claim that Mark had acted independently. Rachel Bennett leaned over and quietly whispered. She built the case herself. She wasn't wrong. After a short recess, Mark's attorney requested a conference with the prosecutor. An hour later, everyone returned. Mark stood. His attorney informed the court that a plea agreement had been reached. Mark accepted responsibility for felony theft of property, criminal trespass, restitution, supervised probation, and a permanent order prohibiting him from entering my ranch without written permission. Judge Whitmore studied him for several moments before approving the agreement. Mr. Holloway, he said, believing you are right does not authorize you to ignore another citizen's property rights. Mark nodded. He never looked in my direction. The criminal matter ended quietly. The civil case did not. Rachel had already provided the HOA's insurance carrier with every document produced during discovery. Within a week, their attorneys requested settlement discussions. The insurance representatives were remarkably direct. We have reviewed the evidence. So have we, Rachel answered. We are prepared to resolve the organization's exposure. Rebecca wanted to continue fighting. The insurance company refused. Its own investigators had concluded that the HOA board acted outside the lawful scope of its authority and exposed the association to substantial financial liability. Several days later, an agreement was signed. The exact amount remained confidential under the settlement terms. What mattered to me wasn't the number. Every legal bill was paid. Every investigation cost was covered. and the improvements I'd postponed around the equipment yard for years were suddenly within reach. 4 days after the settlement became public, Rebecca Holloway submitted her resignation as HOA president. Her letter stated she wished to spend more time focusing on family and personal priorities. No mention of the investigation. No mention of the lawsuit. No mention of the resolution bearing her signature. Just a quiet exit. Ben handed me a copy while we were repairing a section of fence. That's it? I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. That's all she had left. A week later, Sheriff Daniel Brooks stopped by the ranch. He leaned against the fence and watched the cattle move through the pasture. "You know," he said, "I've worked property disputes my whole career." "So have I," he smiled. "But I've never seen somebody lose because of a lack of evidence." He looked toward the subdivision. They lost because they created too much of it. He was exactly right. The only question left was whether the people taking over Silver Creek Preserve had learned anything from the mess Rebecca left behind. I got my answer about 3 weeks later. Ben was replacing a section of fence along the eastern pasture when a white pickup stopped on the county road. A woman stepped out carrying a folder instead of a clipboard. She waited outside the gate. She didn't call out. She didn't walk onto my property. She simply stood there until Ben waved me over. "I think she's from the HOA," he said. "I know." I walked to the gate. She extended her hand. "My name is Melissa Grant. I was elected president of Silver Creek Preserve last week." I shook her hand. "What can I do for you?" She looked toward the subdivision before answering. "I came to apologize." Not for herself, for the board, for the homeowners, for the months of conflict that never should have happened. She explained that the association had elected an entirely new leadership team, retained different legal counsel, and voted unanimously to withdraw every remaining complaint involving my ranch. Then she surprised me. "We'd like to rebuild a working relationship with our neighbors." I looked across the pasture where my cattle were moving toward the water tanks. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means we'd rather solve problems by talking than by threatening lawsuits." That was the first sensible thing I'd heard from anyone connected to that HOA in nearly a year. She opened the folder. Inside was a letter confirming the board's withdrawal of every outstanding demand, along with a formal acknowledgement that my ranch was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. No conditions, no qualifications, just recognition of recorded property boundaries. I read the final page before handing it back. "This should have been settled the day your subdivision was built." "I agree." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she glanced toward the John Deere parked beside the equipment shed. "I've seen that tractor from our walking trail," I smiled. "I imagine you have." "It'll stay there?" "It always has." She nodded. "I think people finally understand that." After she left, Ben leaned against the fence post. "You believe her?" "I do." "You trust the HOA now?" I laughed. "I trust deeds." Over the next several months, the changes were noticeable. The anonymous complaints stopped. The photographers disappeared. No unfamiliar trucks lingered outside my gates. Once or twice, homeowners waved as they drove past the ranch instead of slowing down to stare. It wasn't friendship. It was something better. Mutual respect. One afternoon, Sheriff Daniel Brooks stopped by after finishing another call nearby. He climbed out of his cruiser, looked toward the subdivision, then back across the pasture. "Quiet around here." "That's the idea," he smiled. "Funny how things settle down once everyone starts respecting the property lines." I nodded. The fence never changed. "No, the people did." He tipped his hat before driving away. That evening, I climbed back into the John Deere, the same tractor, the same seat, the same ranch my grandfather had worked before me. As the engine came to life, I looked once toward the eastern fence. It wasn't a wall between enemies. It was simply the place where one deed ended and another began. That's all it had ever been. People sometimes ask if I feel satisfaction knowing Rebecca lost her position. Mark ended up with a criminal record, and the HOA paid dearly for what happened. The truth is, that was never my goal. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. There's a difference. Revenge is about making someone suffer. Accountability is about making sure the same mistake isn't repeated. My family has worked this Montana ranch for more than 70 years. If my grandchildren are fortunate enough to work it after I'm gone, I hope they never have to fight the battle I did. But if they ever do, they'll find the same recorded deed, the same surveyed boundary, and they'll know something my grandfather taught me long ago. Real strength isn't taking what belongs to someone else. It's respecting the line where your rights end and your neighbors begin.
If there's one lesson I hope stay with you after this story, is that staying calm is never the same as giving up. I didn't protect my ranch by shouting the loudest or trying to settle things in the heat of the moment. I protected it by keeping records, respecting the law, and letting the truth speak when it's made a must. The fence never moved, the date never changed, and in the end, those simple facts carry more weight than opinion or assumption ever could. Life has a way of testing whether we react with anger or respond with patience. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stand firm, keep their dignity, and trust that honesty and reparation will outlast pressure. That's true on a ranch, in a neighborhood, and just about anywhere people have to live side by side. Now, I'd really like to hear from you. Have you ever had someone try to tell you what you could or couldn't do on property that was rightfully yours? If you have, type yes in the comments, and if you never faced something like this, type no. I read the comments because your story is often just as meaningful as the ones I share here. And if you enjoy stories about standing your ground with patience, evidence, and common sense, I'd be honored to help you subscribe and join us for the next one. There's always another story waiting down the road.